The crowd was loud, but she couldn't hear anything except her baby crying against her chest. Dust filled the air as men pushed toward the wooden platform, shouting over each other, waving coins and bottles like it was a game. The woman stood barefoot, shaking so hard her newborn's tiny head trembled with her. She tried to calm the child, whispering something soft, but her voice cracked from fear and exhaustion. No one cared. No one even looked at her face. To them she was just an object, a prize, something to own. The men laughed and argued as the bidding began. One man yelled a number. Another shouted higher. The trader running the auction smacked his hand on the post, encouraging them to go louder, faster, crueler. The woman's heart pounded so hard she felt lightheaded. She held her baby closer, trying to shield the small body from all the noise and the staring eyes. She wished she could disappear. She wished she could wake up from this nightmare. But there was no escape. The crowd stood packed around her, blocking every path. She had already tried to step back earlier, but one of the traders grabbed her arm and shoved her forward again. Now she didn't move at all. The sun was hot and sharp on her skin. Sweat rolled down her neck. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Her legs trembled. The platform felt like it was swaying beneath her. She looked around desperately, scanning the faces below. She wasn't looking for a hero. She didn't believe in them anymore. She was just hoping for one kind pair of eyes, someone who might pity her enough to stop this. But everyone stared at her the same way they would stare at livestock. Her baby whined again, a small weak sound, and she felt her throat tighten. She pressed her lips against the newborn's forehead. If not for her child, she might have let herself fall. She might have accepted whatever fate these men decided for her. But that tiny life in her arms was the only thing keeping her standing. She couldn't give up. Not yet. The shouting grew louder. The trader lifted her arm roughly, trying to show her off more. The woman winced. A few men cheered. Another made a comment that sent the crowd laughing. Then, suddenly, the noise dipped. A few heads turned. Someone had stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the crowd. A tall, quiet figure the woman hadn't noticed before. He didn't shout a bid. He didn't smile. He simply stared at the platform, and the entire energy of the place shifted without a word. Before that terrible day, her life had been simple. Hard, yes, but simple in a way that gave her hope. She and her husband had packed their wagon with everything they owned: blankets, cooking pots, tools, a few jars of dried food. They weren't rich, but they were determined. They believed that somewhere past the endless forest and the wide plains, there was land where they could build a home for their child. The baby wasn't born yet then. She was still carrying the little life inside her, feeling those small kicks that made her smile even on the hardest days. They traveled slowly, following the trail like so many others looking for a new start. At night, the fire warmed them. Her husband always kept watch, but he still managed to tell her stories, trying to make her laugh even when she was tired. He dreamed about planting his own crops. She dreamed about raising their child in a place where neighbors were kind and the world wasn't so cruel. The West was full of dangers, but they had each other. That was enough. Until the night it wasn't. It began with the horses. They started snorting and pulling at their reins, restless in a way that set her husband's nerves on edge. He picked up his rifle and told her to get inside the wagon to stay quiet. She didn't argue. She knew his tone. She knew when something felt wrong. The attack came fast. She remembered the shouting first, rough, drunken voices echoing through the dark woods, then a crack of gunfire. Her husband yelled for her to stay hidden. She heard the horses scream as someone cut their ties. Then more shouting, more gunshots, and the heavy footsteps of men who weren't afraid to take what wasn't theirs. She held her stomach and prayed, wishing the baby inside her didn't have to experience her terror. The wagon shook as someone tried to climb into it. She pressed herself against the wooden boards, heart racing. A man cursed and yanked the canvas open. She screamed and tried to push past him, but he grabbed her by the hair. Her husband fired another shot, yelling her name. Someone else fired back. Then everything became muffled, like the world had been wrapped in thick cloth. She remembered falling. She remembered the impact. She remembered pain. When she woke, she was tied to a tree, wrists rubbed raw against the rope. Her husband was gone. The wagon was gone. The horses were gone. Flames still smoldered where their belongings had been tossed and burned. She cried out for him until her throat went hoarse. No one answered. The forest was still except for the rough laughter of the men who had taken her. She begged them to let her go. She told them she was carrying a child. They only laughed harder. One of them said a baby would make her worth even more. Another said she'd fetch a fine price out west. They talked about her like she wasn't even there, like she couldn't hear every word, like she wasn't a person at all. The days that followed blended together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. They dragged her through the forest and across rough ground until her feet bled. When she fell, they pulled her up again. If she cried, they told her to save her tears for whoever bought her. They fed her scraps. They let her rest only when they were too tired to continue. She gave birth sooner than expected, too soon. It happened at dawn after a freezing night. The pain was fierce, and she had nothing to hold on to except a tree root and her own will to survive. The men were annoyed, not sympathetic. They muttered that she was slowing them down. But a baby, even a tiny one, meant money. So they waited, pacing impatiently while she struggled through the agony alone. When the newborn finally cried, she cried with it. She held her child to her chest, trembling with a mixture of joy and dread. She whispered an apology. She whispered a promise. She never asked for a child to come into the world like this. But now that the baby was here, she knew she couldn't give up. As long as that little heartbeat existed, she had to fight. The traders didn't even let her rest long after the birth. They pushed her to walk, even though she was so weak she could barely stay upright. They wrapped the baby in a stolen cloth and shoved it into her arms. She clung to the child, terrified they would take it from her. They didn't. Not yet. As they said, a mother with a newborn fetched a higher price. Some men were sick enough to want both. Eventually, after days of travel, they reached the settlement, if you could even call it that. It wasn't a town. It was a cluster of rough cabins built around a dusty clearing. There was no sheriff, no law, nothing that could stop cruel men from doing whatever they wished. She sensed danger the moment she saw it. The men around the fire, the women who kept their heads down, the hungry eyes watching her as she stumbled into the square. She begged again to be let go. They ignored her again. They locked her in a small shack for the night. She held her newborn close, crying silently, terrified of tomorrow. The baby barely slept, whimpering in hunger and cold. She whispered stories, anything she could remember, just to keep both herself and her child from breaking apart. She wondered if anyone would notice she was gone, if her husband had survived, if he had tried to follow her, if he was still out there searching. Morning came too quickly. The traders dragged her outside before she could stand on her own. They didn't care that she was dizzy or that her legs buckled beneath her. They hauled her onto the wooden platform like she was luggage. One of them grabbed the newborn and tried to take it, but she screamed and clutched the baby so tightly he gave up, cursing that she was being difficult. But he still forced her to lift her head for the crowd to see, and then the auction began. Men pushed forward, curious and eager. She tried to hide the baby's face. She tried to pull back. She tried everything. But the bidding grew louder, harsher. She was surrounded by strangers who saw her as something to buy, and there was no way out. At least, that's what she thought until the moment her eyes caught the shape of a quiet stranger standing alone at the edge of the crowd, watching her with a stillness that didn't match the chaos around him. He didn't look like the others. That was the first thing she noticed, even through her fear. While the men around the platform shoved and argued, this stranger at the edge of the crowd stood completely still. Not frozen, just calm, like he belonged to a different world. His clothes were rough, worn by weather, not by filth. His boots were coated with mountain dust instead of the mud from the settlement. His hair was long, tied back loosely, and his beard looked like it had grown in the wild where mirrors didn't exist. But none of that frightened her. What frightened her was the way he watched her with quiet, steady eyes, eyes that didn't hold hunger, cruelty, or greed. They held something else. something she couldn't name because she had forgotten what safety felt like. The others noticed him too, though not at first. The noise was too loud, the bidding too frantic. But when he took one step closer, a few men turned. Not because he pushed them, not because he shouted. He didn't even say a word. But there was something about the way he moved, slow, purposeful, that made people shift aside without meaning to. Space opened for him as if the crowd was water and he was something solid cutting through it. No one knew his name. People only whispered bits of stories about the mountain man who lived far beyond the usual trails. Some said he'd come down only twice a year for supplies. Others said he lived so deep in the wilderness that even hunters couldn't find his tracks. There were rumors that he'd survived a winter alone after an avalanche took his cabin. Stories that he could shoot a running deer from half a mile away. And darker tales, too, about how he once drove off a band of raiders by himself. No one knew which stories were true, but all of them carried the same idea. He was someone you didn't provoke unless you had forgotten how much you valued your life. He walked closer to the platform, his steps slow but steady, like he was measuring the weight of every second. She watched him, clutching her baby so tightly that the newborn whimpered. She didn't know whether to be afraid of him or hope for something she didn't dare believe in. Her heart hammered, but her eyes stayed fixed on his face. One of the traders finally noticed him approaching. The man raised an eyebrow, annoyed, expecting another bidder. "Well," he shouted, "you want in or not? Place your price, mountain rat." The crowd laughed at the insult, relieved for another moment of entertainment. But the stranger didn't even blink. He didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't flinch. He just kept walking forward, his eyes never leaving the trembling woman on the platform. Another trader waved a hand dismissively. "Move along. If you ain't buying, you're blocking my customers." Still no response. This made the trader irritated. He took a step toward the edge of the platform and puffed out his chest. "I said, move along." That was when the stranger finally stopped. Not because of the demand, but because he had reached the place he wanted to stand, right at the front, close enough to see the pain in the woman's swollen eyes, close enough to hear her newborn's small, frightened breaths. He took a slow breath. His voice when he spoke was quiet, calm, not loud enough for the entire crowd at first, just the trader who leaned in slightly to hear him. "That's enough." The trader blinked, confused. "What?" The stranger repeated it louder this time. "That's enough." The words weren't shouted, but something in them carried weight. The kind of weight that made the noise behind him start to fade. A few men hushed each other. Some craned their necks to see what was happening. The woman felt a shiver run up her spine. She didn't understand why two simple words could silence a crowd of men who feared nothing. Not law, not God, not guilt. The main trader narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you to say what's enough?" The mountain man didn't answer. Instead, he reached behind his shoulder and slowly slid the long rifle from its strap. He didn't aim it. He didn't raise it. He simply held it in his hand, resting it against his leg like it was a natural extension of his body. But even in that relaxed position, everyone understood what it meant. This wasn't a gesture of threat. It was a warning, a reminder. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few men backed up a step. The trader who had been puffing up his chest now swallowed hard but tried to keep his voice tough. "Put that thing away. This ain't your business." But the stranger finally lifted his eyes from the woman and looked directly at him. It was a slow, steady stare. The kind that made your stomach twist without knowing why. The kind that didn't need yelling or posturing. "It is now," he said. A man in the crowd muttered, "Is that him? The one from the ridge, the one who—" Another hushed him quickly. The woman watched all this with a trembling breath. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her whole world had become a blur of fear and uncertainty. But for the first time in days, there was something else mixed into the fear. Something she barely recognized. Hope, small, shaky, but real enough to burn in her chest. She didn't know who this man was or why he cared. She didn't know if he would help her or if this confrontation would only make things worse. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The traders were suddenly uncomfortable. The crowd's confidence was cracking, and all because one quiet man had stepped forward with a rifle resting calmly in his hand. The moment stretched, long and tense. The air felt different. The world felt like it was holding its breath. And the woman couldn't look away from him, because deep down she felt that everything was about to change. The traitor closest to the platform puffed himself up again, trying to pretend he wasn't afraid. His pride wouldn't let him back down, not yet. He spat on the ground and barked, "You think you can walk in here and stop my sale? You got no authority. This is my business, not yours." The mountain man didn't bother responding. He simply shifted his weight, letting the wooden stock of the rifle rest a little firmer in his grip. He still didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The message was already clear to everyone watching. Every pair of eyes in the crowd had locked onto him now. Even the laughing drunkards had gone quiet. People who had been cheering seconds earlier were now frozen in place, waiting to see what he would do next. The woman's heart raced. She held her baby against her chest, trying to shield the child as best she could. The newborn whimpered at the sudden silence, and she gently rocked it, trying to soothe the tiny cry. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow, in the stillness, it felt loud. She didn't dare look away from the man with the rifle. He was the only thing in this place that didn't feel dangerous to her. The mountain man stepped closer, his boots crunching through the dust. The traitor swallowed loudly, a small movement that didn't go unnoticed. The stranger stopped at the base of the platform, close enough that the woman could see the deep scars lining his knuckles and the calm steadiness in his eyes. "This isn't a sale," the mountain man said quietly. "It's a crime." A ripple went through the crowd. The word crime didn't get used much in this settlement, not because people didn't commit them, but because no one bothered to name them for what they were. There was no sheriff, no judge, no jail. The settlement ran on greed and fear, and for years that was enough to keep men like these traitors in control. But something was different now. One voice, steady, low, and certain, had cracked the illusion. The traitor forced out a laugh that sounded thinner than before. "Crime? Out here? Who's gonna stop me? You," he gestured mockingly at the mountain man's rifle. "Put that thing away. You ain't scaring nobody." But the tremor in his voice said otherwise. Another traitor stepped forward, trying to back him up. He had a knife at his belt, and he gripped the handle now with sweaty fingers. He tried to sound confident. "We got numbers, you're one man. One wrong step and we'll—" The mountain man finally lifted the rifle. Not high, not aimed, just raised enough that the motion sliced through the tension like a blade. The sound of its shifting broke whatever false courage the traitors had been clinging to. Several men stumbled backward instinctively. The one with the knife froze, his hand hovering in place. He didn't dare draw it now. He could see the stranger's eyes clearly, cold, sharp, and absolutely sure of what he was doing. The mountain man didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Take one more step toward her. I dare you." No one moved. The woman felt her breath catch in her throat. Her arms tightened around her baby as if protecting it from the world, but her gaze stayed locked on the man who had walked forward without fear. She didn't understand how one person could stand so calmly against a crowd like this. She had seen cruel men before, men who boasted strength, men who were loud and violent. But this man was something else entirely. His strength was quiet, heavy, solid. It filled the space without needing to be announced. The crowd seemed to recognize it too. Even the wind seemed to quiet, as though the world itself was listening. One of the drunker bidders tried to yell something, maybe an insult, maybe a question. But another man elbowed him sharply, telling him to shut up before he made things worse. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men who had been eager to buy a woman minutes earlier now tried to blend into the background. The traitors exchanged nervous glances. The main traitor wiped his forehead with a shaky hand. "You don't want trouble," he muttered. The mountain man's voice stayed calm. "I want her and the child off that platform." "And then what?" the traitor snapped back, desperation creeping in. "You gonna walk off with her? You think you can just take somebody from my auction?" "She isn't yours," the mountain man replied. The trader scowled. "She is when I captured her. That's how it works out here." The mountain man looked at him with an expression that wasn't anger but something colder. "Not anymore." The woman tried to speak then, but her voice cracked. She wanted to plead, to beg, to ask for help, but she was too afraid that saying anything would make things worse. So she stayed silent, holding her child close and praying the stranger wasn't a dream. The second trader, the one with the knife, seemed to gather a bit of courage again. He pointed the blade toward the woman. "She ain't going nowhere unless we say so." The mountain man lifted the rifle half an inch. That half inch changed everything. The knife wielder flinched so hard he nearly dropped his weapon. Sweat dripped down his temples. His eyes darted from the blade in his hand to the rifle in the stranger's grip. He could see the mountain man's finger resting lightly near the trigger, not on it, but close enough that one wrong breath could end him. He backed away slowly. The main trader stuttered something about fairness and claiming rights, but no one was listening anymore, not even the crowd that had felt invincible only moments ago. The mountain man took another small step toward the platform. The woman's breath hitched. He didn't look at the traders now, he looked at her. "Hand her down," he said softly. He wasn't talking to the traders, he was talking to her. Her throat tightened. Her knees wobbled. She didn't know if she could trust anyone again. But something in his voice, steady, warm beneath the roughness, made her believe he wasn't there to hurt her. Behind them, the traders finally realized they were losing control. Not just of the woman, not just of the auction, but of the entire crowd. Men who had been ready to buy a mother and her baby now stepped back, unwilling to get caught in the path of a man who didn't fear them. The settlement had always belonged to the cruel. But in that moment, as the mountain man stood firm with his rifle resting at his side, something shifted, and everyone could feel it. A single man had turned their world silent. And he wasn't finished yet. The platform felt unsteady beneath her feet, but the woman didn't dare move until the mountain man gave her a sign. The traders were too unpredictable, too cruel, and she had learned the hard way that a single wrong movement could set them off. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else, until the mountain man spoke again, his voice low and steady. "Come down," he said, his eyes on her, not on the men he'd just silenced. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a shout. It was an invitation. A promise. Something in his tone told her he wasn't asking as a buyer or a captor. He was asking as someone who meant to protect her, even if he had to stand alone to do it. But the traders weren't ready to let go. Not fully. The main one stepped forward, desperate to reclaim whatever scrap of authority he thought he had left. His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and fear. "She stays. That's final. You can't just—" The mountain man didn't even turn to look at him. He shifted the rifle a little, the barrel lifting just enough to align with the trader's chest. It wasn't raised to shoot, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear: say another word and you'll regret it. The trader's mouth snapped shut. His face drained of color. He held up his hands, backing away with trembling steps. The crowd murmured but stayed quiet, too tense to speak loudly. The settlement had seen fights, drunken brawls and robberies before, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like a storm rolling in, quiet but unstoppable. The woman swallowed hard, her throat dry and aching. She shifted her newborn in her arms, the tiny body warm against her chest. The baby whimpered again, sensing her mother's fear. She tried to soothe the child with soft whispers, though her voice kept shaking. Deep inside, she fought the urge to collapse. She had been standing on sheer will alone for too long. The mountain man took a single step up onto the platform. The wood groaned beneath his weight. His presence filled the small space, pushing back the shadows of the men who had tormented her. He moved with a calm certainty, as if he had done this countless times before, yet there was no harshness in his eyes when he looked at her. Only gentleness layered under the hardened exterior of a man shaped by wilderness and solitude. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Safe. The word felt foreign, too bright, too fragile. She wanted to believe him, but hope had betrayed her so often that she barely recognized it anymore. Still, she stepped toward him. It was a small step, weak, shaking, but it was enough. The mountain man reached out, not to grab her, but to steady her as she descended from the platform. His hand hovered near her elbow, giving her the choice to take it or not. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm but careful, warm despite the cold mountain air still clinging to his clothes. When her boots touched the ground, her knees nearly buckled. The world spun from exhaustion and fear, and she clutched her baby tighter to keep from dropping to the dirt. The mountain man caught her easily, supporting her without a word. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to step back or stay still. The baby let out a soft cry, the tiny voice thin and exhausted. The mountain man glanced at the child, and something subtle shifted in his expression, something almost tender, hidden beneath the rugged exterior. He lowered his rifle slightly, making it clear to everyone that his priority had shifted. Protecting them mattered more than intimidating the men around them. Behind them, the main traitor found his courage again, weak, shaky courage, but enough to try one last time. "You can't just take her. You got no claim." The mountain man didn't turn around. He didn't need to. His voice alone was enough to silence the man a second time. "You come after her," he said, "and I'll show you what a real claim looks like." The threat wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted, but every man in the clearing felt the cold truth in it. There were warnings and then there were promises. This one felt like both. The traitor stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. None of the other men stepped forward to defend him. None wanted to test the mountain man's patience. Even the drunk one stayed quiet now. It was as if the entire settlement had bowed to a force they couldn't understand, a force they couldn't defeat. The woman leaned against the mountain man for support, her breath coming in small, dizzying gasps. She wasn't used to anyone helping her. She didn't know how to accept it, but she clung to it anyway because she had nothing left to keep herself standing. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. She nodded even though she wasn't entirely sure, but she had to try, for her baby, for herself, for the chance to escape the nightmare that had swallowed her life. The mountain man shifted his rifle to his other hand and placed his free arm around her back, steadying her gently. He guided her forward, slow and careful, making sure she didn't fall. The crowd parted before them, sliding aside like reeds in a river's path. No one dared block their way. No one even breathed too loudly. The settlement that had once trapped her now felt like a fading memory as she stepped through the shifting crowd. Each step carried her farther from the platform, farther from the cruelty, farther from the men who had treated her like property. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The only thing that mattered now was the stranger walking beside her, the man who had stepped into the fire without hesitation. And though she didn't know his name, or why he had come, or what would happen next, she felt something warm spark inside her chest. Something she had thought she'd lost forever. A fragile, flickering sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't walking into another nightmare. She was walking toward a chance. They moved slowly at first. The woman's legs trembled with every step, each one a reminder of the exhaustion carved into her bones. The mountain man didn't rush her. He matched her pace, steady and patient, guiding her through the unsettled crowd like he had all the time in the world. His hand remained firm at her back, keeping her upright whenever her knees threatened to buckle. The baby whimpered softly against her chest, sensing the tension still hanging in the air. The settlement was eerily quiet now. The same men who had pushed and shouted during the auction now kept their eyes fixed on the ground. Not one of them dared speak as the mountain man passed. The wind seemed to avoid the place entirely, settling in an unnatural stillness. Even the usual crackle of the fire pits had dimmed. It was as if the entire clearing was holding its breath. She didn't feel safe yet. Not fully. Danger had tracked her for too long to vanish in an instant. But with every step away from that platform, the crushing weight around her chest began to loosen. She tried not to look back, but part of her feared the traitors might come after them anyway, fueled by desperation or pride. She didn't want the mountain man to be hurt because of her. The thought twisted painfully inside her. "You're doing fine," he said softly beside her. His voice pulled her back to the present. She glanced up at him, noticing how his eyes were always scanning their surroundings, checking rooftops, alleys, doorways. He wasn't just leading her out, he was expecting trouble, preparing for it. She didn't know what kind of life he lived in the mountains, but it had clearly sharpened every instinct he possessed. When they reached the edge of the settlement, he paused. The last cabin sat crooked, leaning slightly as if it were tired of standing. Beyond it, a narrow trail slipped into the trees. The forest seemed dark but not hostile, just deep and full of secrets. He turned to look behind them, his jaw tightening slightly. The woman followed his gaze. In the distance, she could see the traders gathering again near the platform, huddled in angry whispers. Their eyes darted toward her and the mountain man, their faces twisted in frustration. They didn't dare move closer, not yet, but their anger burned like a low fire ready to flare. The mountain man noticed them too. He shifted the rifle on his shoulder, the motion enough to make the traders freeze. For a brief moment, no one moved. The tension stretched thin, like an old rope ready to snap. Then he turned back toward the forest. "We need to keep moving," he said. She nodded and tightened her grip on her baby. The trail ahead was uneven, scattered with roots and rocks, but she followed him without question. Each step into the trees felt like stepping into a different world, a quieter one, even if danger still lingered behind them. The forest embraced them with cool shade. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a smell she had once found comforting during her travels with her husband. Now it stirred a painful ache deep inside her, reminding her of everything she had lost. She blinked hard, forcing back tears. She didn't have strength left for grief. The mountain man slowed his pace, letting her catch up more easily. "There's a stream not far from here," he said. "We'll rest there, rest." The word felt distant and almost impossible, but she clung to it anyway. She didn't know when she had last rested, truly rested, without fear or pain gnawing at her. The thought of sitting by water, even for a moment, felt like a small miracle. The trail gradually widened until it opened into a small clearing. A narrow stream cut through the earth, its clear water reflecting the scattered sunlight. The sound of it trickling over rocks filled the air with a soothing rhythm. It felt unreal, like stepping into a memory she'd forgotten she had the right to feel. The mountain man set his rifle against a tree and crouched beside the stream to scoop up water with his hands. He drank first to show her it was safe, then stood and gestured to the water's edge. "You should drink," he said gently. "And the little one too, you both need it." Her throat tightened at the kindness in his tone. She knelt awkwardly, careful not to slip, and dipped her fingers into the cold stream. She brought the water to her lips. It tasted clean, cleaner than anything she'd had in days. The baby stirred and whimpered again, so she soaked a small corner of the cloth and touched it to the child's lips. The newborn suckled weakly, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The mountain man watched silently, giving her space. He didn't hover, didn't rush her, but remained close enough that she felt a strange sense of protection surrounding her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel hunted. When she finally looked up at him, unsure of what to say, he spoke first. "You don't have to tell me everything now," he said calmly. "But we'll need to decide where you want to go." Where she wanted to go. The question felt both freeing and impossible. She had nowhere left. No husband, no home, no family waiting for her. The West had promised her a new beginning, but all she had found was darkness. She looked down at her baby, whose eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet hers. Tiny, innocent eyes that didn't understand the world they had entered. A world that had almost taken them both. Her voice came out small and broken. I just want somewhere safe." The mountain man nodded as if he had expected that answer all along. "There's a settlement about a day's walk from here," he said. "Good people, they won't turn you away." She swallowed hard. It felt overwhelming but hopeful. Something warm flickered in her chest again. the same fragile feeling she'd sensed when he first stepped forward at the auction. She didn't know why this man had risked everything for her. She didn't know what kind of life he would return to once he delivered her to safety. She didn't know whether their paths would cross again after this journey. But for now, she wasn't alone. And for the first time since her nightmare began, the trail ahead didn't feel like a road to danger. It felt like the beginning of something she desperately needed: a way out.